Snow lashed against the window panes in stinging sheets, the kind of high-country storm that could swallow a road in an hour and make the world beyond the glass vanish. Inside the cabin, a kettle whistled on the small propane stove, steam curling lazily toward the timber ceiling. The front door stood wide open, its hinges creaking in the wind. Detective Elise Ward paused on the threshold, breath fogging in the frigid air. She was the first one inside, her boots crunched over the drift that had piled against the sill. The room was silent except for the kettle's shrill cry. "Clear," she called over her shoulder, though her voice sounded far away to her own ears. 2 deputies followed, rifles slung. One of them, a young guy named Nate Colburn, reached for the kettle and cut the flame. "Still hot," he murmured. "Somebody was here minutes ago." Elise didn't answer. Her eyes had fixed on the table in the corner, 2 coffee mugs, one with lipstick smudged on the rim, both half full. Beside them lay a battered leather satchel, its flap stamped with the initials DC. A thin crust of ice clung to the edges, as if it had been brought in from outside and set there in a hurry. Outside, the wind howled again, rattling the stovepipe. The smell of damp wool lingered in the air. 15 years earlier, Daniel Cross and Alyssa Grant had driven their rusty Jeep Cherokee north out of Helena, Montana, toward the Wyoming border. It was meant to be a delayed honeymoon, 5 days off the grid, no phones, no work calls. Just the 2 of them in a rented cabin near Frost Hollow, an old logging trail that curved through the Bridger Range and ended at a place not marked on most maps. Daniel, 28, had grown up in Great Falls, son of a mechanic and a school secretary. He taught U.S. history at the high school, loved hiking, fly fishing, and more than anything, the quiet. Alyssa was 26, an illustrator who made her living designing covers for small press books and sketching portraits in coffee shops. She liked the idea of wilderness more than the reality of it, but she'd agreed to the trip because Daniel had promised a wood-burning stove, a library of old paperbacks, and he'd grinned when he said it, no neighbors for miles. The cabin's owner, a retired ranger named Glenn Cooper, had rented it to them with one condition: sign a waiver. No cell service, no electricity, no road access after the first snowfall. "Folks come up here looking for peace and quiet," Cooper had told them at the key handoff, "but peace can feel like a weight if you're not used to it." The last confirmed sighting of the couple had been at a gas station in Wilsall. The security footage, grainy and washed in green, showed them smiling at each other as they bought 2 cans of beef stew, a kerosene lamp, and extra blankets. Alyssa looked into the camera at one point, made a mock-serious face, and Daniel laughed. 48 hours later, they were gone. Elise Ward had been a rookie deputy then, barely out of academy, assigned to drive supply runs between search teams. She remembered the way the story had gripped the region, newlyweds vanish in Montana mountains, and the way it had ended, without answers. The file had grown cold, a thin cardboard folder in the back of the evidence room. Now in the present, that same satchel with DC. On the flap sat on the cabin table in front of her. It had been pulled from an avalanche drift by a pair of snowmobilers just 3 days earlier. Inside, forensic techs had found a cracked compass, a rusted thermos, and a few journal pages. Most of the writing had bled into illegibility, but 2 entries were still readable. The first, October 29, snow heavier than forecast. "Alyssa says she hears someone outside at night, told her it's just branches." The second, October 31, footprints again, not ours. When Elise first read those words, she'd felt her stomach tighten in a way she hadn't in years. "Sheriff's office got your report," Nate said now, pulling her back to the present. "But why here? This cabin's not even in the original search grid." Elise walked to the fireplace. It was cold, but the ash in the grate was soft and pale, not more than a day old. "Because the satchel was found 2 ridges over," she said quietly. "And this place," she gestured to the walls, "isn't in any rental registry. Someone's been using it as a base." "Think it's him?" Nate asked. Her jaw tightened. "I think someone was close enough to watch them." She didn't say his name yet. Orrin Cade, former Forest Service maintenance hand, fired in '81 for unsuitability for remote assignments. Last known address a burned-out trailer outside Livingston. The only note in his file that meant anything to Elise was from his old supervisor, tends to watch people without talking to them. By the time they stepped back outside, the snow was coming down harder. A wall of white swallowed the trail 30 yards away. Elise pulled her radio and called in GPS coordinates. Static hissed back. Dead zone, Nate muttered. We'll have to hike halfway down for a signal. They started back toward the main logging road. Elise's thoughts kept snagging on details, the kettle still warm, the ash still soft, the way the door had been left open. Whoever had been there had left in a hurry, but not in panic, more like they knew the storm would erase their tracks. By the time they reached the trucks, her phone had a faint signal. She called her supervisor, Captain Dillard. "You're sure it's the same satchel?" he asked. "Elvis himself couldn't convince me otherwise," she said. "Same initials, same make, and the journal matches the timeline." Dillard sighed. "We can open the case, but it's going to mean diverting resources from active searches. You ready to carry this yourself?" "I've been carrying it for 15 years, Elise replied. 2 days later, Elise sat in the records room, the satchel open beside her. She flipped through the original missing persons file, interviews with Cooper, the gas station clerk, a pair of hikers who'd seen the Jeep parked off the logging road. All dead ends. Then she found something she hadn't noticed back in '81, a service log from the Forest Service dated October 30, signed by Cade. Location, Frost Hollow. Task, snow clearing, waterline inspection. Why would a maintenance worker be clearing snow after the seasonal trail closure? And why at the exact cabin Daniel and Alyssa had rented? She leaned back in her chair, the hum of the fluorescent lights loud in the small room. In her mind, she could still see the lipstick on the coffee mug, the thin drift of snow against the open door. That evening, she drove out to Glenn Cooper's place. The old ranger lived in a clapboard house outside Bozeman, a pair of deer antlers mounted above the porch. He answered the door in a wool sweater, eyes narrowing when he saw her badge. "Thought this was done with," he said. "It was," she replied, "until it was." They sat in his kitchen, mugs of black coffee steaming between them. "I don't remember much else," he said after she'd laid out what they'd found. They seemed like a good pair. Young, she wasn't too keen on the cold, I could tell, but he was in love with the mountains. "You ever see anyone hanging around the trail who shouldn't have been there?" Elise asked. Cooper hesitated. "Maybe once. A man mid-30s, tall, wore a parka with the hood up. Thought he was one of ours at first, but when I called out, he just looked at me, didn't wave, didn't say anything. Then he turned and walked back into the trees." "Cade?" she asked. The old ranger's eyes flickered. Could have been, didn't think much of it then. That night, Elise lay awake in her small apartment, the journal entries replaying in her mind, footprints again, not ours. She'd worked enough cases to know that the hardest ones weren't always the bloodiest. They were the ones with no sound, no witness, just the absence where a life used to be. The next morning, she made her decision. She was going to find out what happened to Daniel Cross and Alyssa Grant, whether anyone else believed it mattered or not. The storm broke 2 days later, leaving the bridgers glazed in ice. Elise took Nate and a forensic tech named Carla back to the hidden cabin. This time they searched every inch. Carla found the first clue, a cigarette butt under the cot, its filter stained and warped. "Fresh," she said, "couple of days tops." Nate, combing the shelves, found a tin box tucked behind a row of canned beans. Inside, half a dozen photographs, curled and water-damaged. 4 showed a man and woman, Daniel and Alyssa, sitting in front of a fireplace. Their eyes were open, but their faces slack, heads tilted slightly toward each other. 2 more photos were of the cabin itself, taken from outside at night. Elise studied the first photo, her fingers tight on the edges. In the reflection of the window behind them, barely visible, was a figure, broad-shouldered, hood up, holding a camera. "Oren," she said. They hiked out in silence. Elise could feel something shifting in her, 15 years of questions beginning to take shape into something sharper, heavier. Whoever had been in that cabin recently wasn't just passing through. He'd been there before, and he'd be back. At the trucks, she looked at Nate. "We're not just reopening a case," she said. "We're reopening a hunt." He nodded slowly. And you think he's hunting too? She met his eyes. I think he never stopped. Snow held the hills in a hard, glittering grip the morning Elise drove west toward the Gallatin. The road climbed in pale switchbacks, ice hissing under her tires. A radio farm crowned a ridge to her right, a forest of skeletal towers unchanged since the Reagan years. She clicked the dash heater a notch higher and rehearsed her questions aloud. Dates, supervisors, reasons for termination. She needed the shape of a man, habits, insults, how he entered a room and how he left it before she went back into the trees. Orrincade's last documented boss, a retired ranger named Glenn Maries, lived at the dead end of a plowed gravel road, in a single wide shaded by ponderosas black with wet. A ceramic eagle guarded the stoop. When he answered her knock, he kept the glass storm door between them for an extra beat, eyes small and wary over the rim of his flannel collar. "Detective Ward," she said, flashing her ID. "It's about Frost Hollow," he exhaled. The door opened. "I figured you'd come eventually." His living room smelled of old coffee and damp wool. A Trout calendar from 1999 hung crooked beside a shelf of small-town phone books. He waved her toward a chair with a cracked leather seat and took the recliner for himself. When he sat, his knees popped like knuckles. "Orrin worked seasonal for us," Maries said after she put the satchel and photocopies on his coffee table. "Showed up in '79, real quiet, real capable with his hands, fixed anything that had a hinge or a wind-up in it, not much chatter. Would stand at the tree line like a pointer dog and listen. That part always got to me. Listen for what? Folks, their noise." Maries looked out the window at the skeleton trees. He was bad at being inside a room. He liked to be the wall. "You fired him November 5, 1981, Elise said. "Reason listed, unsuitable for remote assignments." That's an odd phrase to use for a wilderness hand. Maries nodded once, jaw tight. "It's code for my stomach says no." He turned up at a ridge camp Halloween night when he wasn't assigned to. Couple up there, honeymoon people, the kind who think a lantern and a kiss make them bulletproof. Orrin didn't say a word when I asked why he was off his route, just smiled, like he'd been let in on a secret and I hadn't. Elise let that settle. "He ever talk about a woman named Grace Adler?" Maries' eyes moved, a small flinch. "How far in this are you?" "All the way." He scratched at a nick on the chair arm. "I heard him once say a name when he thought I wasn't listening. Grace. He wasn't praying, that's all I got." Outside, a plow grumbled past, throwing a fan of slush against the flattened weeds. Elise reached for the satchel, slid out the scan of the Polaroid, the posed couple in front of the fire, the silhouette behind them in the window glass. Maries pulled his glasses down from his head with two shaking fingers. He didn't speak for almost a minute. "That's the look," he said finally. He had that stillness, like he wasn't in the picture was in him. On her way out, he stopped her at the door. "Detective, this part of the world keeps a habit like a dog keeps a bone. You follow a man who knows every fold in that country. You don't get to make the rules. You just try not to teach him yours." Back in the car, Elise sat with her hands on the wheel until the windshield fog cleared. He likes to be the wall. Her reflection hung in the glass, face thinner than it used to be, hair pulled back clean because loose hair got in the way of wind. She thought of the rookies who didn't remember the cross-grant file and of the mothers who did. She turned the key. Captain Dillard gave her 1 day, plus 2 deputies and a dog team borrowed from the county south. "You want to burn goodwill on a ghost, burn your own," he'd said, "but you stay inside protocol and you don't get stuck. I don't want to send 2 men to bring back one woman who thought she could outrun a whiteout." They parked the trucks at a locked gate where Frost Hollow's logging road began to climb. The storm had scrubbed the sky to a hard enamel blue, the kind of brilliance that made shadows look like saw cuts. Nate Colburn hefted an evidence pack and grinned at the dog, a square-shouldered black shepherd named Boone who vibrated with purpose at his handler's knee. "Remind me why the dog looks happier than the rest of us," Nate said, breath fogging. "Boone's not paying alimony," the handler, Rosa, muttered, checking the dog's booties. She nodded toward Elise. "Where do you want him keyed?" "The cabin first," Elise said. "Then the creek cut where the satchel dug out. If he hits human scent on the cabin perimeter that isn't tourist or our team, we mark it and circle out to the tree line. They snowshoed in under a canopy that hushed every footfall. Sunlight fell in narrow ladders through the firs. Boone ranged ahead on a long line, nose down, zigging toward the wind. The cabin looked smaller by daylight. The open door had been rehung, its freshly shaved latch catching with a new click. Carla, the forensic tech, set a flag just short of the threshold. "Baseline," she said. No new prints inside, but the ash in the stove reads different density than 2 days ago. Someone burned softer fuel. "Paper?" Elise asked. "Cardboard, newsprint, pulpy." I pulled 3 small clinkers. They used a fast burn and left before it went cold. No more than 12 hours since. "Son of a," Nate started. "Don't say it," Elise snapped, sharper than she intended. "Mark and bag." Boone gave a sudden high, sharp yip and yanked down the hill toward the creek cut. Rosa let him run the length, then locked the line. The dog stood rigid above a wind-combed trough where the snow had collapsed around a void and refrozen. Boone's nose worked like a piston, then he pawed once, twice, and sat, looking up, whining in his throat. "Human residual," Rosa said, crouching. "Likely long rest, deep." She scraped with a gloved hand, fingertips striking ice. "Somebody's storage dug here and it recrusted." Elise crouched beside her, palm flat to the frozen rim. She pictured cardboard boxes, a tilt of old newspapers, the hiss of a short burn. She imagined a man's gloved hands feeding the stove in a hurry while the weather turned and the radio whispered search team chatter through the trees. "You're listening to us," she murmured. "You always were." They flagged the site and kept moving, skirting the creek where the avalanche had shaved the slope in an old silver scar. Rosa keyed Boone to track human scent not associated with their team. He quartered the hill, nose high now, testing the air like a swimmer tasting aftershave in a pool. 300 yards in, the dog swung hard right and dragged them toward a stand of spruce crowded so tight the snow on their branches made a single roof. The world went gray and still. Boone stopped dead and let out a low, anchored bark, the kind he used for a find that wasn't a body but wasn't nothing. "What do you have?" Rosa whispered. The answer lay under a camo tarp stretched tight as skin, edge-pinned with river stones. Nate slid a hand under and lifted. The smell hit first, mouse nest, old metal, kerosene, the sour note of unwashed wool. Beneath, someone had carved a den into the duff and lined it with pallets. Crate shelves held batteries, canned meat, a spool of fishing line, a hand-crank radio tuned to handwritten frequencies in pencil. And above it all, nailed into the trunk with crooked roofing tacks, a sheet of paper torn from a ledger book, its edge neatly perforated. A map, not printed, drawn in a patient engineer's hand. The Bridgers and Gallatins boiled down to slopes and squiggles, fire roads and drainages sketched in neat graphite, places circled in red wax pencil. 22 of them. A twin circle around a knob labeled in block letters, Grace Point. Elise put a hand against the cold bark to steady herself. "He's leaving us a story and daring us to read it," she said, almost to herself. Nate pointed to the edge of the den where something glinted in the bottom seam of a plastic dishpan. He plucked it out with tweezers and held it up. A printer cartridge, empty, HP blue plastic scuffed white. "That cabin shot we found," Carla said softly. "The posed one, he's got a printer somewhere with juice." Rosa slipped Boone a treat and sat him. "You want my read? This den isn't home. It's a handoff point. Guy like this, he carries out what matters in a pack and keeps the rest in caches like paw prints. Then he'll come back to refresh," Elise said. "Food, ink, batteries, or to watch us visit." She straightened. "Everyone keep your heads on a swivel. No heroics. We tag and go." They worked in a practiced silence, bagging and photographing, Elise's pencil tapping the ledger paper map as if it might answer back. A crank radio whispered a crackle of voices, snatches of dispatch jargon. Carla bent to it and held her breath. "He's been riding our frequency," she said faintly. "You hear that? County simplex. He's got the snowplows, the sheriff, forest service. He knows when a road opens and when it doesn't. He heard us coming to the cabin and stepped out the back." Let's stop narrating his bedtime story, Elise said and clicked her radio off. The others followed. Back at the trucks, Dillard met them with a state investigator from Helena and a card-carrying frown. You turned off your radios, he said without preamble. So did he, Elise said. He's been listening for years. The state man, Special Agent Rudd, tan parka, clean boots, flipped through photos one-handed as if he didn't like getting mountain on him. You pulled a hand-drawn map and a dead printer cartridge out of a mouse hole, and now you want air support and encrypted SATCOM. No, Elise said. I want you to stop assuming this is a ghost story. She put the Polaroid on the hood of the truck. He posed them. See the tilt, mouth slack, eyes open. That's not a souvenir, that's a ritual. And the window reflection shows him photographing his own staging. That's a performance. It escalates. Every performance does. Rudd studied the photo longer than she expected. He set it down with care. We'll get you a Black Hawk tomorrow to fly the circled sights. Encrypted handsets tonight, but no cowboys, Ward. You step on a tripwire, he said in 1983, and I don't have a man to spare to walk you out. I'm not the one who enjoys being the wall, she said. He frowned. What? Nothing, she said. Send me a profiler and a tracker who's worked serial hunters, not just lost elk hunters with a flask. When the men were gone, Nate leaned his elbows on the hood, breath pluming. You ever think about how you could have picked a saner hobby? He asked. Like quilting, Elise said. Like bowling, they wax the floors and people clap when you knock stuff down. I tried it, she said. I like the part where the ball comes back from the dark. Night fell with a quickness that made the world feel narrower. Elise laid out the copies of the ledger map in her room at the motel in Livingston. Her dinner, half a turkey club, sweated in its wrapper. She moved pushpins over the Xerox contours and wrote names beside dates on a yellow legal pad. Cross Grant, 81. Mayors/Mayors, 91. Brandt/Brandt, 97. She drew a blank space between the first and second pairs and wrote one word in it, Grace. She took her phone to the window and called an archivist friend at the state library, a woman named Janie who owed her 2 favors and liked to settle debts faster than most. I need old missing hiker reports from 78 to 80, Elise said when Janie picked up. Pine Hollow Ridge, Gallatin Forest. Any mention of a woman about 20 poet singer liked to hike alone. Can I get a name? Janie asked. Grace Adler or close. You always call me 5 minutes before my show starts, Janie said mock grand. Make it worth it. It might be the first line of a confession, Elise said. Silence. Then I'll call you back in an hour. Elise hung up and paced, the room too small, the ceiling too low. She thought of Oren's map pinned under roofing nails, the clean little circles like bullet holes. She thought of the ledger paper with its neat perforations, as if each page had been ripped from a book issued by a hand of authority, Ranger Station 6, maybe, or an old fire tower no one remembered. And she thought of the way the winter light at 4 in the afternoon made the motel parking lot cars look like toys in fake snow. Her phone buzzed at 47 minutes. I have a Grace Adler from Missoula, Janie said. Disappeared 1979 near a place called Grace Point Overlook. She hesitated. I know. She had a sister who filed 2 follow-ups and then nothing. No remains. The trail burned in a fire. Literally half-mile of forest went up. Official cause, lightning. Whispered cause, a man with a match who wanted the trail gone. Elise swallowed. Send me everything. And Janie, yeah, thanks. Don't thank me. Bring her home. Elise stared at the phone a long time after the call ended. Bring her home. How many times had she said those words in kitchens with magnets on the fridge and unslept couches? How many times had she put her palm on a father's shoulder and felt the bone beneath the shirt like a question he couldn't ask? There was a knock at her door. Nate, hair damp from a shower, held up a 6-pack of moose drool and a plastic bag of gas station jerky. You either need sleep or beer, he said. I don't know which one I'm authorized to prescribe. She stepped aside. He took in the map, the pushpins, the legal pad with Grace, written like a bruise. What's the play? He asked. We fly the circles quietly. We put cameras covering the den. He watches us. We watch him. Meanwhile, we run Oren through everything, W2s, DMV, any utility record within 100 miles of a red circle. printer ink isn't magic. He bought it somewhere. He got a solar panel from someone or stole it. You don't live off the grid this long without brushing somebody else's. And when we find him, she took one of the beers and set it unopened on the table. We don't wait for him to knock. We change the rule he thinks we're playing by. Nate chewed and studied the Polaroid again. You ever get the feeling you're the only one in the room who knows the ending you don't want? All the time, she said quietly. The motel heater clanked on. Outside, a semi downshifted on the highway, a low mechanical groan that felt like the earth moving. Elise looked at the Polaroid one more time, then slid it back into its sleeve. She put the satchel on the chair and rested her palm on the DC initials. Tomorrow, she said to Daniel, to Alyssa, to Grace, to the cold country that kept everyone's secrets. Tomorrow we walk where he walked. Before dawn, a rented Blackhawk lifted from a frozen tarmac at the small airfield and swung east toward the mountains. Elise strapped in beside the door gunner, headset tight over her ears. Agent Rudd buckled opposite, pale under the green interior light. Rosa and Boone sat between, the dog calm in the thunder of rotors, eyes bright. They flew the first circle, an old lookout ruin scabbed to a knife-back ridge. Then the second, a decommissioned ranger bunkhouse, now a rectangle of stone and sorrow. Nothing living moved in either place but a fox crossing a snow bowl with the baked arrogance of a creature that owned its world. At the third site, the pilot banked over a box canyon. "You're gonna like this," he said in her headset, dry as dust, "or you're not." Below, tucked under a rock overhang like a mouth, was a structure, a long, low coffin of a building with a patchwork roof, 2 stovepipes, and a slender antenna that reached up through a break in the trees. The snow around it was scabbed and slick, not soft. Heat had bled through and glazed it. Rudd leaned to the window. "You got your base," he said. "No," Elise whispered. Her heart did a small, precise thing in her chest, like a gear slotting into a notch. "We got his museum." She could feel it in her bones, the careful staging, the angle to the slope, the antenna tuned to the radio songs of searchers, the wall a man becomes when he wants to disappear. The helicopter's shadow crawled over the roof like a black spider and slid away. Elise pointed. "Set us down at the clearing, no joyrides, we go quiet." As the Blackhawk flared for landing, Boone put his chin on Rose's knee and closed his eyes like a child bracing for a roller coaster drop. Elise tightened her harness and felt the weight of the satchel against her ribs. When the skid kissed snow, the cold leapt into the cabin like a living thing. Orrin Cade had built a place to keep his stories from blowing away. Now she would walk in and try not to become one. The cold was immediate, so sharp it seemed to cut into Elise's teeth when she breathed through her mouth. Snow underfoot was crusted hard enough to hold her weight without sinking, the top layer glazed to ice by days of freeze-thaw. Above them, the antenna rose like a single finger through the trees, frost feathering the cable that ran into the low roof. Rosa unclipped Boone's harness from the helicopter tie-down. "Stay behind me until I give him the cue," she said over the wind. Boone, ears pricked forward, already had his nose in the air. Nate scanned the tree line with his rifle slung at low ready. Nothing moves here unless it wants to. Elise's eyes went to the stovepipes, one short and rusted, the other tall, patched in segments, the black lip dusted white. No smoke now, but a faint ring of melt showed around its base. Heat had been rising through that pipe sometime in the last 48 hours. Rudd trudged up beside her, boots crunching. "We go in like we agreed, slow, controlled room by room. We treat it like a crime scene, not a battlefield." Elise didn't answer, her gaze held on the door, thick plank boards, newer than the rest of the structure, with a steel padlock dangling uselessly from a hasp. The lock had been cut clean through. Rosa gave Boone a quiet "seek" command. The shepherd pulled her forward to the door, nose twitching. He gave one short, decisive bark and sat. Elise looked at Rudd. "He's been here, recently." Inside, the air was stale but warm enough to sting with the scent of old ash, dried pine sap, and something sharper, machine oil maybe. The single-room layout was bigger than it had looked from the air, an open rectangle divided by 2 long workbenches running down the middle. The first wall stopped Elise cold. Every square foot was covered: maps, photographs, sketches, scraps of paper, even strips of cloth pinned in neat rows. Each cluster had a heading in block letters: NAMES, dates, SCASONS. The handwriting was the same she'd seen in the ledger page map from the den. Precise, patient. Boone whined low in his throat and nosed toward a corner where a narrow desk sat under a jury-rigged light. A solar panel cable snaked through a hole in the wall, leading to a battery bank and a compact generator. On the desk, a Canon printer, a flatbed scanner, and a cardboard box of ink cartridges in both HP and Canon brands. "Guy S not just living off the grid," Nate said quietly. "He's running his own archive." Rudd pulled on gloves and began flipping through the photos pinned over the desk. Some were the same style as the Polaroid couples posed in front of cabins, slack-faced, eyes open. Others were candid shots: tents at dawn, women fetching water from streams, men chopping wood. None of the subjects looked at the camera. Carla, the tech, moved to a long table lined with shallow trays. Inside each tray, objects were laid out as if in a museum: coins, rings, watches, keys. Each was labeled with a strip of masking tape: Mayers 91, Brandt 97, Cross 81. Elise felt the back of her neck prickle. "He's curating them," she murmured. From the far side of the room, Rosa called out, "Detective, over here." Elise crossed to where Boone sat in front of a tall metal locker. The door was ajar, a chain hanging loose where a lock should have been. She pulled it open. Inside, wrapped in layers of plastic, was a red wool coat. The bloodstains were brown with age, but the style matched Alyssa Grant's description exactly. Beneath it was a bundle of letters tied with string. Elise recognized the name in the corner: Alyssa Grant, Helena, M.T. Tucked into the pocket of the coat was another photograph. This one hit harder than the Polaroid. Daniel and Alyssa sat side by side in front of a stone hearth, their posture unnatural, as if propped. A lamp burned beside them, the shadows on the wall stretching long and thin. But what caught Elise's eye was the reflection in the hearth's glass screen. Just behind the couple, a man's figure loomed, camera at his face, the arc of a smile barely visible below the lens. "Oren," she said under her breath. They spent an hour cataloging the room. Every map, every note was photographed in place before being bagged. Carla found a weathered ledger book, half the pages torn out, but the remaining ones filled with cramped, angular writing. June 3 watched them make a fire. She laughed at the way he folded the blanket. "I kept the blanket." Oct 28, lantern in the window. She looked out twice. "I didn't move." Nav 1, they were quiet after. The entries jumped years at a time, but repeated the same kinds of details: always a couple, always some act of domestic intimacy observed from a distance, then an abrupt end. When they had enough photographed to keep the lab busy for weeks, Elise stepped back outside into the blinding snowlight. The silence of the forest felt heavier after the murmur of gloves on paper inside. She crouched to study the snow at the base of the wall. Boot prints, faint but clear enough in the crusted surface, tread from a style of boot she hadn't seen in stores in at least 2 decades. The prints led toward a break in the trees, then vanished where the wind had drifted snow across the path. "He was here when we found the den," she said to herself, "and here again before we flew in." Nate joined her, squinting against the light. "You think he's still close? I think he's watching us right now." Back at the helicopter, Rudd was already on his sat phone to the command post, calling in a full forensic sweep. Elise pulled Nate aside. "That coat, those letters, they were trophies," she said. "But the way everything's organized, that's more than keeping mementos. He's building a narrative for himself." Nate frowned. "And for us, maybe, but if he's telling us a story, then the ending is something he's planning." Boone barked suddenly from the edge of the clearing. Rosa snapped to attention. "He's got something hot." Elise followed them into the trees. Boone led them to a snowbank at the base of a rock outcrop. Half buried in the crust was a small metal tin. Rosa pried it open. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. Elise unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. "Detective Ward, you almost have the order right, but the first page is missing. I'll let you read it when you're ready to see how it ends." There was no signature, but there didn't need to be. The flight back was quiet except for the thump of the rotors. Elise kept the note in her lap, her gloved thumb resting over the word's first page. She thought of the ledger's missing sheets, of the name Grace in Mari's living room, of the red circle labeled Grace Point on the den's map. She had the shape of a cycle now, each couple part of a ritual Oren had been refining for decades. And if the ledger's first page was his beginning, then Grace Point might be where it all had started. As the helicopter banked over the bridges toward Livingston, Elise looked down at the endless folds of white and dark timber. Somewhere under those trees, Oren Cade was moving, maybe toward her, maybe away, but always with the same quiet, patient steps. She wasn't sure yet if she was following him, or if she was walking into the space he'd been preparing for her all along. By the time they landed back in Livingston, the mountains had vanished behind a wall of cloud. Snow was falling again, slow at first, but with the heavy, wet weight that promised a full day's worth before it quit. Elise stood beside the helicopter as the blades wound down, holding the folded note Oren had left in the tin. The first page is missing. She'd been on enough cases to know this wasn't just taunting, it was instruction. Oren wanted her to see something when he decided she was ready. That meant he already thought she was part of his story. Rudd wanted the contents of the cabin locked down before nightfall. "We'll have a mobile lab on site in 2 days," he said. "Until then, no one but forensics goes back in. If he's still in the area, we'll pick him up on one of the trail cams we're planting." Elise didn't argue, but she knew Oren wouldn't get caught by a static camera. He'd been surviving here for 4 decades, ghosting around rangers, hikers, and hunters without a single verifiable sighting. You didn't do that by stumbling into lenses. She drove straight from the airfield to the county archives. The archivist, a narrow-shouldered man named Cliff, met her at the door with a cup of burnt coffee and a stack of thin, yellowed folders. "Pine Hollow Ridge, late 70s, right?" he asked, walking her back to a desk. "This is all that survived the fire. Literally, the fire took out most of the ranger station's records." He spread the files across the desk, names she'd never seen, brief reports, and then there it was. Adler Grace Missing Person Report 10/12/79, filed by her sister, Emily Adler, Missoula, MT. Last seen hiking alone toward Grace Point Overlook, carrying a small pack and a notebook. Weather clear, unseasonably warm. A week later, a wildfire swept through the area. Search suspended due to hazardous conditions. No remains found. Elise traced the line where the ranger's pen had pressed too hard on the page, making the paper ridge like scar tissue. The description matched what Mari's had told her. Dark hair, 21, liked to sing while she walked. That same detail had been in Oren's tape. Grace sang when she cooked, sang when she walked. She looked up at Cliff. "Any photographs?" He shook his head. "Fire got them." She took a slow breath. "Then Grace Point is our next move." The next morning broke in white and gray. Elise stood over the command table in the mobile unit, a topo map of Gallatin Forest spread beneath her hands. She circled Grace Point in red and then drew a second, smaller circle around an old Firewatch trail that branched off from it. Nate looked over her shoulder. "You think he took her there? I think that's where he lost her," she said. "The fire might not have been nature's doing. And if it was his first, he'd go back over and over." Rudd was less convinced. "You've got half the county under snow warnings and want to send a team into a canyon with one way in and one way out." "I want to get there before he knows we're looking," Elise said. "We have 2 days before that storm front pins us down. After that, you might as well wait until spring." They compromised. Elise, Nate, Rosa with Boone, and 2 additional deputies. No helicopter, visibility was already dropping. They'd go in on snowmobiles, stash them, then snowshoe the last mile. The forest closed in fast once they left the main trail. Snow muffled everything, no bird calls, no wind, just the steady crunch of snowshoes. The air was thick with the smell of spruce and cold metal from the sleds cooling behind them. Boone's ears flicked forward. Rosa felt the leash tighten and murmured a low "easy." The dog's nose was high, pulling scent from ahead rather than the ground. They crested a low ridge, and there it was, Grace Point Overlook. The fire had left scars even 40 years later. Blackened snags stood like headstones, and the soil between was bare of snow in places, as if nothing had ever grown back. At the edge of the overlook, a ring of stones lay half buried in drift. Boone padded straight to it, sniffed, then sat down hard. Nate crouched and brushed away snow. In the center of the ring, a scatter of charcoal and ash was fused to the frozen soil. He looked up. "Detective, this is old, but it's not 40 years old," Elise finished. She could see it. The black was sharp, not bleached gray. A fire had burned here recently. She circled the ring, scanning. Something metallic glinted under the moss on the left side of one stone. She pried it out carefully, an earring, small and silver, tarnished but intact. "Bag it," she told Carla, who had trudged up behind them, "and flag this spot for a full excavation." The deputies fanned out to sweep the area, but Elise stayed by the fire ring, looking at the view. From here you could see the trail curling back toward the valley, and if you knew exactly where to look, the narrow cut that led to the canyon where they'd found Oren's den. It was a direct line. She crouched and touched the stone again. "You came back here," she murmured. "Maybe you never left." Rose's voice cut in from the far side of the overlook. "Detective, you'll want to see this." They followed her to a shallow depression where the snow was unnaturally smooth, as if it had been packed down by something heavy and then left to settle. Boone pawed at it once, then whined. Nate knelt and scraped away the top layer. Beneath there was a thin sheet of plastic, frozen stiff. Carla peeled it back to reveal a tin box, much like the one Oren had left in the clearing. Inside, a single sheet of paper, folded with the same precision as before. "You're standing where it started." She didn't want to leave. "The trees kept her longer than I could." There was a smudge of ash along the bottom edge. Back at camp that night, Elise laid the two notes side by side on her bunk. Her fingers hovered over the newer one. "You're standing where it started." It was confirmation of what she'd suspected, but more than that, it was an invitation. Oren was telling her the cycle's origin, as if passing a torch. That meant he wasn't finished. Nate knocked lightly on the cabin door. "We pulled something else from the earring, skin cells, degraded but viable enough for a familial match." She didn't let herself hope. Grace's sister, partial. Enough for the lab to say with confidence they're related. Elise exhaled slowly. "Then we found her. You sound like you wish we hadn't." She looked at the fire in the small stove. "This isn't closure. This is him tightening the circle." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin walls. Elise thought of the missing first page of Oren's ledger, of the way he'd written, "I'll let you read it when you're ready." And she realized that ready might not mean prepared. It might mean when he'd brought her to the same place Grace had stood, just before the fire. Somewhere out in the dark, Oren Cade was moving again. The storm would be his cover. And if she read his pattern right, the next part of the story was already written. She just hadn't stepped into it yet. The wind came in long, low moans through the pine tops, shaking snow loose in soft avalanches that pattered onto the roof of the mobile command trailer. Elise stood over the central table, fingers spread on the topo map like she was holding it in place against the storm. "You want a what?" Special Agent Rudd asked, his voice flat but loud enough to cut through the noise of the space heater. "Stage a couple," Elise said. "Remote cabin, same seasonal window, same geographic corridor. We control the environment, the timeline, and the perimeter." "That's entrapment," Rudd shot back, "and it's reckless as hell." "It's a trap," she corrected. "And I'm done waiting for him to choose the next names." Rosa looked up from where she'd been drying Boone's harness near the stove. "You're saying give him exactly what he wants." "On our terms," Elise said. "He's never taken a solo hiker, never a group, always a couple, always late fall or early winter when snow gives him cover. If we give him the pattern, we can predict his approach and take him alive." Rudd leaned on the table. "And when he kills them before you can get there, they'll be trained agents," Elise said, already anticipating the objection. "Not civilians. They'll have panic buttons, body cams, thermal drones overhead, response teams within 2 miles. "You're gambling on the idea that he can't tell the difference," Rudd said, "that he won't smell the setup." "He's not supernatural," Elise said. "He's a man with habits. We've been chasing him on his ground. Time to make him step onto ours." The silence in the trailer stretched, broken only by the heater fan. Finally, Rudd exhaled. "You've got 48 hours to plan it. Pick your couple." They chose Agents Miles and Aaron Parker, married 5 years, experienced in deep field operations, comfortable in hostile terrain. Their cover was simple: city couple on a week-long getaway in a refurbished Forest Service cabin, advertised only through a small network of backcountry guides. The location was a reconstructed shell on the southern edge of the Frost Hollow corridor, accessible only by snowshoe or snowmobile, with no cell signal. By the time the Parkers were dropped off by ATV, the interior had been wired with hidden cameras, microphones in the wall studs, and a series of silent alarms. Outside, 14 agents were dug into snow blinds and tree stands, their thermal scopes covering every possible approach. A ring of drones patrolled high above, invisible against the gray sky. The Parkers played their parts well. By day they took short snowshoe hikes, made small talk on the porch, and stacked firewood. By night they cooked together, left the lantern glowing in the front window, and lingered by the fire before retreating to the bedroom. Everything looked unremarkable, which was exactly the point. For 2 nights nothing happened. No heat signatures outside the perimeter, no movement in the tree line. Boone picked up no fresh human scent on his patrols. The drones captured only wind-shifted branches and the slow creep of drifting snow. On the 3rd night at 3:14 a.m., Boone's handler called in a low, urgent report. Fresh scent, North Ridge, downwind within 300 yards. A drone pivoted to the coordinates. The feed on the monitor in the command trailer sharpened, a figure moving between the trees, tall, hood pulled tight. Steps deliberate, angled toward the cabin. Elise leaned closer to the screen. Hold positions, no engagement until he's inside the perimeter. The figure paused behind a boulder, knelt, and stayed there for nearly 2 minutes, watching. Then it slipped back into the trees and was gone. The 4th night he came closer. Thermal picked up his body heat just outside the front wall of the cabin. Inside, Miles sat in a chair by the fire, pretending to read. Erin moved in the kitchen, her back to the room, pouring hot water into mugs. Their hands were steady, but Elise knew every nerve in them was alive with the knowledge that someone was watching. At 2:41 a.m., a camera on the ridge flashed, not the drone, but a handheld. The faint burst lit the cabin's snow-framed outline for a fraction of a second. Somewhere out there, Orrin Cade was documenting them. He never approached the door. He stayed in the dark until the snow began to fall again, erasing his tracks, and then he vanished. Dawn brought the surprise. On the porch, centered on the welcome mat, was a small tin box. Inside, a hand-drawn sketch of the Parkers sitting by the fire, rendered in tight, precise lines. 2 strands of hair, one dark, one lighter, were taped to the back, and beneath them a Polaroid. Elise's throat tightened as she lifted it from the box. It was the cabin, same angle as the drone footage, but the date in the corner was the problem. It was 2 days before the Parkers had arrived. "He was here first," Nate said from beside her. "He knew before we even started building the op." Elise's hands closed around the photo. "He's telling us we're the ones walking into his plan." In the command trailer, Rudd stared at the Polaroid for a long time. "If he knew we were here from the start, then we're not running a sting," he said. "We're running an audition." "He's making contact," Elise said. "That means one of 2 things. He's preparing to strike, or he's preparing to end this." "Which do you think it is?" Rudd asked. Elise didn't answer. She kept looking at the Polaroid, her own reflection faint in its glossy surface. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of the lenses and the lights, Orrin Cade was watching them all. And for the first time in 40 years, he'd left something behind that wasn't just a trophy. It was a message. Snow hammered the Frost Hollow Valley all day, a relentless, wind-driven fall that blurred the pines into gray smears and muted every sound beyond 10 yards. Elise stood over the workstation in the trailer, the Polaroid in one hand and a tablet with drone imagery in the other. "Freeze it here," she told Carla, who was scrubbing through thermal drone footage from the previous nights, right before the flash. Carla stopped the video. The cabin sat framed in the snow, the warm glow of the lantern visible in the front window. Elise tapped the screen. That's the angle of his shot, but he was higher 20, maybe 30 feet. Tree stand, Nate suggested. Elise shook her head. Too steady, and see this here. She zoomed in on the upper right corner of the Polaroid. He's shooting past something metallic. It's catching just enough light to give a reflection. Rosa lined in. That's not a branch, that's hardware. They overlaid the image on archival topo maps and satellite data. It took less than 20 minutes to line it up. The vantage point sat on a shelf of land known to old-timers as Hunter's Bluff, once home to Fire Lookout 12, decommissioned in 1978 after the roof collapsed under heavy snow. Rudd frowned at the map. That tower's not on any current survey. It's still there, Elise said, or enough of it for him to use. The snow eased by morning and the sky cleared into the brittle blue glare that made everything feel sharper. They snowshoed in from the west to avoid telegraphing their approach from the valley. Boone worked ahead, tether taut in Rosa's gloved hand. Hunter's Bluff was steeper than it looked on the map, the last 50 yards a scramble over shale glazed with ice. Elise's thighs burned by the time they crested onto the narrow shelf. The remains of the fire tower loomed at the far end, 4 legs of rusted steel still standing, the roof and walls gone, the floor a patchwork of old planks and new boards, nailed down with deliberate care. Inside, the smell of oil and cold metal clung in the air. One corner was stacked with recent supplies, jerky packets, water jugs, a rolled sleeping bag. A small propane heater sat cold in the center. But it was the wall opposite the open view that stopped Elise. Photographs, dozens pinned in neat rows. Some were of past victims, others she didn't recognize, candid shots of hikers, campers, couples by trailheads, and in the middle a row of photos of her. Her academy graduation taken from outside the chain-link fence, walking to her car in Colorado Springs in 2004, talking to a witness outside a liquor store in Billings in 2010, sitting in the driver's seat of her unmarked truck last year, coffee in hand, staring at a case file. None of them were official, all were taken from a distance. Her pulse thudded in her ears. He's been watching me longer than I've been watching him. Nate scanned the other walls. This is, what, some kind of trophy room? No, Elise said quietly. This is casting. He's deciding who gets to be in the story. They found a desk drawer locked with a rusted hasp. Nate pried it open with his knife. Inside was a sealed envelope with her name printed in precise block letters. Ward to be opened last. Rosa looked at her. You sure you want to do that here? I'm not leaving it behind, Elise said, slipping the envelope into an evidence bag and tucking it into her jacket. Beneath the envelope was a thin notebook, its pages brittle. The first half was written in the same hand as the ledger pages from the den, but these entries were older, late 70s dates. Sept 14, 1979 saw her near the ridge. She sang to herself while hiking. Didn't take her, not yet. Oct 2, 1979 she waved when she saw me. Said the trees were listening. I didn't believe her then. Grace Adler. Elise didn't need the name on the cover to know it. The final entry in the notebook was dated October 11, 1979. Fire tomorrow. It will keep them away. I will keep her close. Back in the trailer that night, Elise sat alone with the envelope. She peeled back the flap and slid out a single black and white photograph. Grace Adler stood in a clearing, snow in her hair, one hand resting on the trunk of a pine. She was smiling at someone just out of frame. On the back, typed in faded ink, I waited for the right season. Now it's always the right season. There was no signature, but she didn't need one. Rudd wanted to pull her off field work, citing compromised objectivity. Elise shut him down. He's fixated, yes, but that means he'll keep making contact, and right now I'm the only one he wants contact with. You're assuming that's a good thing, Rudd said. I'm assuming it's leverage, she replied. Because she could see it now, the first page Oren promised her wasn't just about Grace, it was about the moment that lit the fuse in him. And if she could get that page, she might finally understand not just what he'd done, but why. But to do that, she'd have to follow him deeper into the story. And in Oren Cade's world, stories never ended the way you wanted. The map from Oren's den lay spread across the command table, its edges curling where the wax pencil had smeared. 22 red circles, each marking a site where he had either struck or prepared to. Elise's eyes kept returning to one near the bottom, smaller than the rest, with no label, just a faint X beside it. "It's the only one without a name," Nate said, leaning over her shoulder. "Or the only one he hasn't finished," Elise replied. They traced the coordinates against current maps. The location sat on a shelf between Marrow Lake and Hunter's Crest, two places they'd already swept. A narrow, overgrown trail connected them, a route that hadn't been maintained since the late 80s. Rudd was skeptical. "It's a gap in the record, not proof he's using it now." "Everything on this map is deliberate," Elise said. "If the X is unmarked, it's either because it's fresh or it's waiting." They went in light, Elise, Nate, Rosa with Boone and two deputies to cover the rear. The trail was barely a footpath now, a line of packed ice twisting through spruce so dense the light turned greenish. Snow filtered down in slow spirals through the boughs. Boone caught scent first, ears pricked, head swinging left then right. Rosa loosened the tether. "He's picking up something human but not recent." They followed him down a slope into a shallow basin. At first, Elise thought the snowdrift ahead was just the wind's work. Then she saw the straight lines beneath it, edges too clean for nature. They dug with gloved hands until they uncovered a camouflaged tarp. Underneath, stacked crates neatly wrapped in plastic. The contents made her jaw tighten. Canned food, sealed water jugs, extra clothing, and in one crate, a bundle of envelopes, each containing a Polaroid. Most showed cabins and campsites from a distance, shot through trees. But the last three were different, grainy images of a man and woman in winter coats walking together near a snow-covered porch. Elise's chest went cold. "That's not Daniel and Alyssa," Nate said, peering over her shoulder. "No," Elise said, "that's Miles and Aaron Parker from last week." The dates in the corners told the rest of the story. Two were taken before the bait op began, just like the earlier Polaroid. The third, Aaron bending to brush snow from the porch step, was time-stamped 2:41 a.m. the night Oren flashed his camera. "He was close enough to touch them," Rosa said quietly. Elise rifled deeper into the crate. Beneath the Polaroids was a sheet of ledger paper, edges perforated, folded into quarters. She opened it slowly. "You're walking the path she took, not far now." It was unsigned, but it might as well have been in neon. They swept the basin for other caches and found two more, both buried under layers of snow and pine boughs. One held nothing but batteries and small propane tanks. The other was different, half the space taken up by a large plastic tub sealed with duct tape. Inside were clothing items, a wool sweater, a knit cap, gloves, all women's, all tagged in the same neat block handwriting: Grace 79, Alyssa 81, Hannah 97. And at the bottom a tag Elise didn't recognize, reserved. The bag under that label was empty. Nate let out a slow breath. He's planning another one. Back at the mobile unit, Elise pinned the new finds on the evidence board. The unmarked X on the map wasn't just another site, it was a staging area. Oren had been watching the bait op from there, collecting fresh images while holding onto artifacts from past victims. Rudd stared at the reserved tag. "You think he has someone picked already?" Elise didn't answer right away. She was looking at the ledger note, not far now. Every time he made contact, it was moving her closer to something. Grace Point, the missing first page, and maybe the end. Finally, she said, "I think he's inviting me to see it happen." "And you're going to follow that invitation?" Rudd asked. She met his eyes. "If it's the only way to stop him before that bag isn't empty." The storm had settled in again by nightfall, blotting out the mountains. Elise sat at her desk, the reserved tag under a desk lamp, the shadows sharp around it. It wasn't just another piece of evidence, it was a placeholder, an unfinished chapter in a story Oren had been writing for 40 years. She didn't know if the blank space was meant for a stranger or if he'd already written her name there. The paper in her hand felt heavier than it should. Ledger edge perforations neat as teeth, folded into quarters. "You're walking the path she took, not far now." Oren's handwriting was like his photographs, precise, unhurried, leaving no doubt that every line was deliberate. Elise stared at it long after the others had gone to rack out. The reserved tag from the empty clothing bag sat on the desk beside it. lit by the yellow cone of the desk lamp. Somewhere in those two pieces of evidence was the answer to where the first page was hiding. It was Rudd who gave her the break. It was Carla. She came into the trailer at dawn, hat hair wild, holding a sheet from the lab. "You wanted paper source analysis," Carla said, sliding it over. "All those ledger pages, same manufacturer. And get this, they stopped making that stock in 1982. Only place we can track it to is state issue. Forest Service. It was part of the old station logbooks." Elise's eyes narrowed. "Which stations?" Carla smirked. "One that didn't burn down, Firewatch Station 6, just past Devil's Hollow. Decommissioned after a landslide, but it's still standing, barely. It took half a day to get a chopper that could handle the crosswind through the canyon." Elise, Nate, Rosa, and two deputies lifted off under a slate sky. From above, Devil's Hollow was a jagged scar, sheer rock walls funneling into a choke point before spilling into dense pine. The station sat on a tilted ridge just beyond the gap, its roof caved on one side, stone chimney leaning like it had been punched. They sat down in a small clearing a quarter-mile away and snowshoed in. The air had that deep forest stillness that felt like it had weight. Boone's breath steamed in quick bursts. Inside, the main floor was a wreck, boards warped, wind whistling through the gaps. But the basement was intact, a single low room of stone and old timber, and every wall was covered, drawings, hundreds of them, most in charcoal, some smudged into near abstraction, others sharp as photographs. Faces, silhouettes, pairs of figures standing near a circle of stones, always two, always the man behind the woman, always from behind, as if the artist couldn't or wouldn't draw their eyes. In the center of the floor was a circle of stones built with the same deliberate care. Elise stepped inside and felt the air shift, colder somehow. She crouched and began to lift the stones, one by one, working inward. Beneath the top layer was a mix of charcoal, fabric scraps, and something harder. Bone. Rosa called for the evidence techs, but Elise kept going. She uncovered a small, singed locket, its hinge stiff with soot. Inside, a photograph of a young woman, dark hair, wide smile. On the back, Grace A., 1979. Her throat tightened. "It's her," she said quietly. The coroner's team moved in, bagging each fragment. Partial remains, consistent with a female in her early 20s. Preliminary analysis put time of death in the late 70s. Elise stood at the edge of the ridge until the light went gold behind the mountains. She thought of Grace's missing person report, of the way Maurice had said she sang while she walked. She thought of Oren's notebook, "Fire tomorrow, it will keep them away, I will keep her close." The circle of stones wasn't just a hiding place, it was an altar. Every disappearance since had been a reenactment, a rehearsal for something Oren had lost in that fire. They swept the rest of the station and found one more piece, a small, sealed jar under a loose floorboard wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were sketches on brittle paper, all of Grace, sitting on a log, laughing, turning away from the viewer, each one dated in the fall of 79. On the last page, written in that same blocky hand, she didn't know the ending, neither will you. Elise slipped the page into an evidence sleeve. Her fingers shook, but not from the cold. Back at the mobile unit that night, Rudd wanted to call the discovery a victory. "We can give the Adler family answers, and we can tie her to Cade now without a doubt." "It's not a victory," Elise said flatly. "It's the origin point. He's been building back to this for 40 years. Grace Point wasn't an ending, it was his beginning." Nate glanced at the reserved tag still pinned to the board. "And now he's got a place for the next one." Elise looked at the map again, 22 circles, the X between Marrow Lake and Hunter's Crest, the ledger page promising she was not far now. "We're not just chasing him anymore," she said. "We're standing where he wanted us to, and the only thing left is to find out who he's saving that bag for." And she couldn't shake the feeling that the name on the tag might already be hers. The envelope was waiting for her at dawn. No postage, no address, just her name, Detective Ward, in that precise block handwriting she'd come to recognize in her sleep. It had been slid under the door of the mobile command trailer sometime between midnight and 5:00 a.m. Bypassing 2 roving patrols and a bank of motion-triggered trail cameras, Whoever left it had stepped into the heart of the task force without leaving so much as a footprint in the fresh snow. Inside was a cassette tape, labeled in the same hand, the ending. Rudd wanted it sent straight to Quantico for analysis. Elise overruled him. "If this is what I think it is, it's not a message for the Bureau," she said. "It's for me." They played it in the operations tent with the lights low and the heaters humming. The tape hissed before the voice came, calm and measured, as if reading from a prepared script. "I always liked cabins. People think they're just wood and nails, but they hold things, breath, memory, smoke. Grace sang when she cooked, she sang when she walked. Even when she was alone, she said the trees were listening. I didn't believe her then, now I do." The voice paused, a faint hum underneath, wind through timber maybe. Then, "I never meant to hurt anyone, not at first. I just wanted to see her again, so I found others. Faces that almost matched, voices that came close, but none of them knew the song. None of them knew the words." Elise's grip tightened on the edge of the table. She could feel every set of eyes in the room on her. The voice shifted, lower now, the tape distorting slightly. "You think I'm a monster. I'm not. I'm just a man with a broken film strip, one perfect moment burned away. All I've done since is try to splice it back together, scene by scene, frame by frame. But the ending always burns." A faint click, he'd stopped and started the recorder. "You weren't supposed to find her, not because I didn't want you to, but because that meant the story had to stop, and I like having one more chapter. Tell Lisa I'm proud of her. She almost got it right." Then nothing but the hum until the tape clicked off. The tent stayed silent. Even Rudd didn't have a ready line. "He's giving you permission," Nate said finally. "That's what this is. He wants you to be the one to close it." "Or to join it," Rosa said. Elise didn't move for a long moment. The last line, "she almost got it right," kept turning over in her head. Almost meant there was still something she didn't understand. And with Oren, the gap between almost and all the way could be the difference between ending the cycle and becoming part of it. By mid-afternoon, a chopper sweep over the X, sight on the map spotted fresh snowmelt patterns, 2 narrow strips in an otherwise untouched clearing, like someone had been running a small generator. They set down a half-mile out and approached on foot. The structure was little more than a reinforced linta built into a rock wall, camouflaged with deadfall. Inside, the floor was bare except for a single object, a sealed plastic bag pinned under a rock. Inside the bag was a Polaroid. Elise in profile, taken through the trailer window 2 nights ago, head bent over the evidence board. On the back, written in smudged pencil, "The reserved place is ready." Back at the trailer, the air was brittle with tension. Rudd wanted to pull her off the case. Nate argued it was too late. Oren had fixed on her, and if they tried to wall her off, they'd lose their best chance. "He's already inside your perimeter," Nate said. "Better to have you moving toward him with us than him pulling you out there alone." Elise looked at the Polaroid one last time, then set it face down. "We end it before the storm clears. If we wait, he'll disappear into the mountains again and we'll get another empty winter." "You're talking about going to him," Rudd said. On his ground, she met his stare. "That's where he's been building this for 40 years. That night the storm thickened, smothering sound and light. Elise sat alone in her quarters, the reserved tag on the table beside her badge, the cassette tape in her hand. If Oren wanted her to see the final page, she would, but it would be on her terms, or it would be the last thing she ever did. The storm broke just before dawn. The mountains rose sharp and white against a sky scrubbed clean, the kind of cold clarity that made every shadow cut like glass. Elise stood outside the mobile command trailer, coffee cooling in her gloved hand, watching her breath plume into the air. She'd been awake all night, staring at the Polaroid Oren had left, the one with her own face in the trailer window, and the empty clothing bag marked reserved. When Rosa came up behind her, boon in tow, Elise didn't turn. "He's not running," she said. "He's waiting." "Which means he has a place picked out," Rosa replied. "Probably already set up." Elise nodded. "And if the pattern holds, it's within a mile of Grace Point, full circle." The team moved fast, no helicopters this time, too loud, too visible. They used snowmobiles to cut the distance, then dropped them a ridge away from their target area. The rest would be on snowshoes, silent. Nate, Rosa, Boone, and 2 deputies flanked Elise. Rudd stayed back to coordinate. They reached Grace Point by late morning. The old fire ring was still there, dusted in new snow. Boone caught a scent almost immediately, pulling them toward a narrow cut in the ridge. The track wound down into a hollow where the wind barely touched the snow. That's when they saw it, a cabin smaller than the others they'd found, built from scavenged timber wedged tight between rock faces. The chimney was cold, but the snow on the roof was thin, melting from residual heat inside. No footprints around it. The last snowfall had covered his tracks, but he was there. She could feel it. Elise went in first, weapon drawn. The single room was lit by a lantern on a crude desk. The walls were bare except for one thing, a single sheet of ledger paper pinned dead center, its top torn where other pages had once been bound. The handwriting was his. October 5, 1979, she sang today while making a fire, said the trees would remember her. I told her they'd remember me too. Tomorrow I show her the stones, the first page. On the desk below it sat a Polaroid camera, a fresh pack of film, and a folded piece of paper. Elise unfolded it. You're in the right place. Now all we need is the ending. Behind her, Boone gave a sharp bark. Elise spun, but the doorway was empty. Then a voice came from outside, low and steady, like it was talking to itself. You found it. Orrin Cade stood 20 feet from the cabin, framed by the pale light off the snow. He looked older than she'd imagined, hair gone to silver, beard ragged, but his eyes were the same from the decades-old photos. Still, watchful, unblinking, no weapon in sight, just a small leather-bound notebook in his hand. You brought company, he said, glancing toward the tree line where Nate and the others were moving into position. But they can't hear the ending, only you. Elise kept her voice even. You've been writing it for 40 years. I think we've all earned the right to hear it. He smiled faintly. It's not something you tell, it's something you do. He dropped the notebook into the snow between them. That's the rest of the pages, Grace, all of it. You can read it or you can finish it. She didn't move, neither did he. The air between them felt thin, like it might shatter if either of them stepped forward. Finally, he said, every story needs someone to see it through. She was the first, you could be the last. Boone's bark broke the moment. Orrin glanced toward the sound, just enough for Nate to move in, weapon up. Rosa flanked from the opposite side. For the first time, Orrin's eyes flickered like he was seeing the end of a reel. You're not ready, he said softly, almost to himself. Then he stepped back into the tree line, and in 2 seconds he was gone, vanished into the snow and shadow like he'd never been there. They swept the area for hours. Boone picked up trails, lost them, picked them up again, but they always ended in wind-scoured rock or ice-crusted deadfall. The cabin yielded nothing but the pinned page and the notebook. The notebook was worse than she expected, fragmented, looping back always to Grace. Never an admission, just a retelling. She said the trees would remember her. I told her they'd remember me too. Back at the command trailer, Rudd called it what it was. We had him and we lost him. Elise closed the notebook. No, we ended his cycle. He can't finish what he started, not without me, and now he knows I'm not going to play. Until he finds someone else, Rudd said. She didn't answer. She didn't have to, because she knew Orrin's obsession wasn't transferable. The reserved tag hadn't been for a stranger, it had been for her, and now he'd have to decide if the story was worth telling without its chosen ending. 2 weeks later, the snow came heavier than it had all winter, sealing off most of the Frost Hollow corridor. The task force disbanded. Evidence went into cold storage. The Adler family received the remains from Firewatch Station 6. Headlines faded. Elise returned to her apartment in Helena. On her first morning back, she stepped out onto her small balcony with a cup of coffee. The street was quiet, the snow muffling the city noise. That's when she heard it, a faint click, the unmistakable sound of a camera shutter from somewhere across the street. She turned slowly, scanning the windows opposite. Nothing moved, no glint of a lens. Just the slow drift of snowflakes through the cold air. She stayed there until her coffee went cold, eyes on the street. If Orrin was still out there, and she knew he was, he had just told her the same thing he always did. The story wasn't over.